I almost ignored the inventory alerts hitting my inbox this morning. I usually do. You see these big red clearance banners and it's almost always a complete gimmick. A fake 10% discount on a 60Hz panel nobody wanted in the first place. But then I actually looked at the raw SKU tracking. It is a full-blown panic dump out there right now. Hi, this is Chris Walker. We always tell people to buy during Black Friday or the Super Bowl, right? Actually, scratch that. That advice is officially dead. The absolute biggest price crash is happening exactly right now in this weird late February window. Why? Because regional warehouse managers are literally out of physical floor space. The 2026 models, the C6 Wave, the new Bravias, are literally on the delivery trucks, and retailers are slashing 60% off top-tier flagship mini-LEDs just to get the boxes out the door. We're talking 65-inch LG C4s getting flushed out for under $1,200, which honestly I thought was a retailer glitch at first. If you walk into a store today and pay full MSRP for anything with a new release sticker, you aren't buying better tech, you're just bailing out a brand's bad inventory planning. Before I show you the exact models they're practically giving away and the deals you still need to actively avoid, if you value analysis that actually protects your wallet, hit subscribe. It's the only way we keep these deep dives completely independent from the manufacturers. All right, let's look at the actual math on this TCL drop. Let's get into the actual mechanics of why this is happening right now, because once you understand the retail calendar, you stop falling for the marketing traps. Here's the reality of big box retail. Best Buy, Amazon, Costco, they don't actually care about specs. They care about cubic feet. TVs are massive. They are incredibly expensive to store. And right now, we're in the late February hangover. Last year's Black Friday and holiday push, it didn't clear enough inventory. I've been looking at the supply chain data, and the warehouses are sitting on a massive surplus of 2024 and 2025 panels. And here come the 2026 models rolling off the cargo ships. The LG C6 Wave, the new Samsung line, the refreshed TCLs, they need physical rack space, so store managers are hitting the panic button. They are executing what we call an inventory flush. They are aggressively crashing the prices of premium high-zone mini-LEDs and OLEDs down to their absolute cost, sometimes slightly below cost, just to get the giant boxes out of the building. So when a brand tells you that their new 2026 model is a revolutionary leap in processing, I need you to understand that is almost entirely a psychological trick to justify charging you full MSRP. The processing chips have hit a plateau. Adding a new AI, alpha, whatever label to a processor mostly just means the TV is going to try and artificially sharpen the faces of people in a 1080p YouTube video, which usually just makes them look like plastic mannequins anyway. The actual raw panel performance, the contrast, the color volume, the motion handling, it has barely moved the needle this year. Buying the new release right now is just willingly writing a check to fund a brand's marketing department. Which brings us to the absolute ceiling of current value, the TCL 65-inch QM8K. Let me be completely transparent about this TV. When it launched at around $2,500, I told people to hold off. It was a great panel, but at that price, you were encroaching on premium OLED territory, and the math just didn't make sense. But this week, Best Buy and Amazon have taken an absolute scythe to the price tag. They've slashed the 65-inch down to under $1,000, a 60% drop, $999 for a flagship high-zone QD mini-LED. Actually, let me put that into perspective. A year ago, $1,000 got you a mid-tier edge-lit piece of garbage that bloomed like crazy and couldn't handle a bright living room. The QM8K is pushing over 2,000 nits of peak brightness in real-world windows, not those fake 1% test patches the marketing guys use to inflate the box numbers. I mean real, sustained brightness in a 10% window when you're watching an HDR movie. I had this unit in the testing room for a month, and I remember turning on Mad Max Fury Road in HDR, and the explosions literally made me squint. It is a light cannon. If you have a living room with massive floor-to-ceiling windows and sunlight blasting in at 2 p.m., this is the TV that fights back and wins. The anti-glare coating on this specific panel is aggressive. It diffuses direct light into a sort of soft purplish haze across the screen, rather than a mirror reflection. It's not perfect. If a lamp is directly behind you, you're still going to see a smudge, but it's vastly superior to the older VA panels. But we have to talk about the reality of owning this thing, not just the highlight reel. Because when you push a backlight this hard, there are physical consequences. Look, TCL's local dimming algorithm is incredibly aggressive on the QM8K. They want deep inky blacks to compete with OLED, so they crush the near black details just a tiny bit. If you're watching a really dark scene, say the Batman, you might lose a little bit of shadow detail in the folds of a dark suit compared to a master reference monitor. And the blooming, it's mostly controlled straight on. But if you have a wide seating arrangement, if you're sitting off to the side at, say, a 40-degree angle, and white subtitles pop up on a black letterbox bar, you are going to see a noticeable halo effect. The light leaks. It's just the physics of an LCD panel, no matter how many mini-LED zones you cram behind it. And then there's the heat. I don't think people realize this until they get it mounted on their wall, but a TV pushing this much voltage gets physically hot. If you touch the back panel near the power supply after a 3-hour gaming session, it is uncomfortably warm. Make sure you aren't burying this thing in a tightly enclosed entertainment center without ventilation, or you're going to cook the mainboard prematurely. Is it a deal breaker? At $2.5 grand? Maybe. I'd expect absolute fluid perfection, but for under $1,000, for this level of HDR impact and color volume, I will gladly wait 10 seconds for the menu to load. It is, without question, the current best value ceiling for a bright room setup. You literally cannot buy a better LCD TV for this amount of money right now. The math just completely breaks in your favor. If you're hunting for this specific deal, make sure you are checking the exact SKU. Retailers love to put last year's lower-tier models right next to the QM8K on the website with a similar discount to confuse you. I've put a link below to the vetted exact QM8K model currently on the clearance flush, so you don't accidentally buy the wrong variant. It's the safe path if you're pulling the trigger this week. Before we pivot and talk about the absolute bloodbath happening over in the OLED market, I want to know what you guys are actually struggling with. I'm building out the testing roster for the studio next month. What 2 TVs are you completely stuck between right now? Drop the models in the comments. The algorithm hates it when I say this, but I actually read every single comment for the first 48 hours, and the most debated matchups are getting pulled into the studio for a direct shootout. Tell me what you need tested. Okay, so if the TCL was the brute force light cannon, this next price drop is for the darkroom purists, the cinematic snobs. And honestly, this is the one that made me pick up the phone and tell my own brother to cancel his 2026 pre-order immediately. If that TCL drop feels like overkill for your living room, this next one is where the math goes from great deal to absolute robbery. We need to talk about the last call on the LG C4. The LG C4 at $1,200 for a 65-inch, this is the one that completely breaks the traditional buying cycle. We are looking at maybe a 72-hour window, maybe a week tops before this specific stock just completely dries up. Retailers are aggressively flushing these out to make room for the C6, and they are taking an absolute bath on the margins to do it. But I need to pull the emergency brake for a second, because the hype around OLED can make people completely blind to what it's actually like to live with one of these panels day in and day out. Everyone talks about the infinite contrast and the perfect inky blacks. And yes, in a pitch black basement playing a high-end HDR game, it looks like a window into another universe. But the reality of putting this in a normal living room is a lot more complicated than the showroom loop makes it look.
Let's talk about the physical reality of this TV first. If you have never unboxed an LG OLED, you are not prepared for how terrifying it is to handle. The top half of this panel is essentially a sheet of glass that's millimeters thick. When you and a buddy are trying to lift this onto a wall mount, the panel physically flexes. It bends. You will hear tiny little creaks from the plastic housing at the bottom, and you will hold your breath thinking you just snapped a $1,200 piece of tech in half. I don't care how many of these I mount in the studio, my heart rate spikes every single time. And once it's on the wall, you have to deal with the ambient light reality. LG talks a massive game about the brightness of their newer EVO panels, and compared to an old C1, sure, it's a step up. But let me be completely blunt. If you put this TV opposite a sliding glass door that gets afternoon sun, you are going to be miserable. The screen has a glossy finish, which means it doesn't just wash out the color, it turns into a giant, expensive black mirror. You will sit down to watch a dark show like House of the Dragon or Severance, and you will just be watching a very high-resolution reflection of your own living room furniture.
Then there's the firmware, and this is where I actually get pretty frustrated with LG. Wait, let me explain exactly what I mean here, because it's not a bug, it's a deliberate design choice. It's called ASBL. Auto Static Brightness Limiter. It's a safety mechanism to prevent burn-in. If the TV detects a static image for too long, it slowly dims the screen to protect the organic pixels. Sounds great, right? Except the algorithm is horribly flawed. If you are watching a movie with a long, extended, dimly lit dialogue scene where the camera doesn't cut frequently, the TV's processor gets confused. It thinks the movie is paused. So right in the middle of a tense, dramatic moment, the screen just starts getting darker and darker until you can barely see the actors' faces. You literally have to grab the magic remote, wave it around to bring up the UI cursor just to tell the TV, hey, I'm still watching this, and the screen instantly pops back to full brightness. It completely destroys the immersion. For a TV that is widely considered the ultimate cinephile display, it's an incredibly annoying quirk. And we have to talk about WebOS. LG's operating system used to be the gold standard. It was fast, it was minimal, it stayed out of your way. But over the last 2 years, they have turned your premium television into a massive, unavoidable billboard. When you hit the home button, you aren't just looking at your apps anymore. You are greeted by massive auto-playing sponsored banners for cars, credit cards, and streaming shows you don't care about. The processor on the C4 is fast, but it still stutters for a fraction of a second when it's trying to load all those high-res advertisements over your Wi-Fi connection. It feels cheap. It feels like you subsidize the cost of the TV by agreeing to let them put a digital billboard in your living room.
I know the home theater purists are going to come for my throat in the comments for this, but I honestly think we are reaching a tipping point. Is the perfect black level of an OLED actually worth dealing with a UI that actively fights you and aggressively advertises to you every time you turn it on? I want to hear from you guys on this. If you own an LG OLED right now, are the ads on WebOS driving you to buy an Apple TV 4K, or do you just ignore them? Let's argue about it down in the comments, because I think the brands need to see how much we actually hate this. But maybe you don't care about perfect black levels. Maybe you don't care about the nuance of shadow detail. Maybe you just want to completely overwhelmingly dominate your wall space. If that's you, then we need to talk about the absolute biggest flex purchase currently available on the market, which just took a massive, unexpected $1,000 price cut this week, the Hisense 100-inch U8 series. It dropped from roughly $4,000 down to $2,997 this week, and I need you to understand the sheer scale of what we are talking about here. This isn't just buying a TV, this is a logistical event. I actually had to help a buddy take delivery of one of these last month, and I didn't fully grasp the physical reality of a 100-inch panel until it was sitting in his driveway. The box weighs almost 200 pounds. It is over 7 feet long. We literally could not physically fit it around the turn in his standard L-shaped staircase. We had to unbox it in the garage, lay a blanket on the floor, gently slide the bare, unprotected panel out, and have 3 grown men carefully walk it up the stairs while praying nobody tripped. If you live in an apartment building with a standard elevator, forget it. It's not going in. You have to measure every doorway, every hallway, and every turn before you even think about clicking the checkout button. But once it's on the wall, it completely alters the geometry of the room. It feels like you installed a commercial jumbotron in your house. And this is where the debate gets really heated, because under $3,000, the 100-inch U8 absolutely murders the ultra-short throw projector market. Why would you spend $3,000 on a laser projector and another $1,000 on an ambient light rejecting screen just to get a washed-out 100-inch image that you can only really enjoy with the curtains drawn? The U8 is a mini-LED. It pushes massive blinding brightness. You can watch a Sunday afternoon football game with all the windows open and the image punches right through the ambient light. It completely removes the primary downside of a massive home theater setup.
But, and this is a massive but that you will not see on the Best Buy spec sheet, you are making some very real sacrifices for that scale. First of all, it's a VA panel. This means the viewing angles are incredibly narrow. If you are sitting dead center on the couch, the contrast is fantastic. But if you have a wide U-shaped sectional and someone is sitting off to the far left or right, the colors immediately start to wash out and a gray haze falls over the image. At 100 inches, this problem is actually magnified because even if you are sitting dead center, the edges of the screen are so far away from your direct line of sight that you might actually see a little bit of color shifting just looking at the corners of your own TV. You need a deep room. You cannot sit 6 feet away from this thing, or you will literally have to turn your head like you're at a tennis match to see the UI elements. And then there is the Hisense motion processing. I keep seeing this downplayed in written reviews, but I notice it immediately in the testing room. Actually, wait, let me be really precise here. If you are watching a 24 frame per second 4K Blu-ray, it handles the cadence perfectly fine. But the moment you switch to fast-paced sports, hockey, or a panning camera in a soccer match, the processing engine occasionally stumbles. You'll see this tiny, almost imperceptible micro stutter around the edges of fast-moving players. It's an artifact of the processor trying to insert artificial frames to smooth out the motion, and it just can't quite keep up with the math in real time. You can turn the motion smoothing completely off, but then you get a natural stutter that is highly magnified by a screen this large. It's a trade-off you have to be willing to accept for the price point. There's also a weird acoustic issue. The internal speakers on the U8 are actually surprisingly loud, but the plastic chassis of a 100-inch TV is massive. When an explosion happens in a movie, the low-end frequencies literally cause the plastic casing on the back of the TV to vibrate and buzz. It creates this hollow, rattling resonance that drives me absolutely insane. If you're dropping $3,000 on a screen this size, you are legally required to buy at least a dedicated soundbar, if not a full surround system. Do not use the TV speakers or you will ruin the illusion.
So we have the TCL light cannon for under $1,000, the cinematic LG OLED on a clearance flush, and the massive Hisense wall dominator, but the real question is, which one is actually the right financial decision, and which one is going to give you massive buyer's remorse 6 months from now? Let's break down exactly who should buy what, and I'll tell you the exact models I would personally put my own credit card down for today. So when we actually pull these 3 specific panels into the testing room and stop looking at the manufacturer sheets, the buying decision gets incredibly obvious. You just have to be honest with yourself about how you actually live in your house. If you have a dedicated basement theater or a massive open concept bonus room, and your primary goal is just absolute jaw-dropping scale for football Sundays or multiplayer gaming, the Hisense 100-inch U8 at under $3,000 is your play. Just understand that you are buying a logistical project, not just a television. You are trading pixel-perfect processing for sheer physical dominance. It's the ultimate brute force flex, but you have to pair it with an actual sound system or you're just watching a silent movie on a billboard. Now, if you were a cinephile, if you actually care about seeing exactly what the director intended in the shadows of a Dune Blu-ray, and you have curtains you can pull shut, you buy the LG C4. At $1,200, it is the absolute best overall pure picture quality you can get for the money, full stop. But, and I mean this seriously, you only buy the C4 if you control your lighting. If you have a bright, airy living room with a bunch of skylights, do not buy this OLED. You will spend the next 5 years staring at a reflection of your own ceiling fan. Which brings us to the TCL 65-inch QM8K. For 90% of the people watching this
video right now, this is the best value lock of the entire year. Under $1,000 for a high-zone mini-LED that can literally fight the midday sun and win. Yes, the Google TV interface has that weird 10-second cold boot lag. Yes, it runs physically hot to the touch, but the raw HDR impact you are getting for $999 is something that cost $3,000 just 2 development cycles ago. It is the absolute sweet spot of price to performance.
Hi, Chris again. Here is the absolute truth bomb that the major brands are terrified you are going to figure out this week. Those 2026 models, the C6, the new QLEDs, they are already sitting in the back stock rooms. I've seen the early firmware notes, I've seen the panel specs, and I am telling you right now, as someone who tests these things for a living, the jump in actual visible image quality this year is virtually zero. We are talking about a 5% brightness bump that you can only measure with a calibration colorimeter and an AI processor label slapped on the box. If you wait 2 weeks and let this inventory flush end, those 2026 models are going to hit the floor at their full undiscounted MSRP. You will be paying $2,500 for a 65-inch TV that performs almost identically to the one you could have bought today for $1,000. That extra $1,500, you aren't buying better contrast, you aren't buying better colors, you're literally just paying for a different letter printed on the cardboard, and you are subsidizing a billion-dollar company's Super Bowl commercial. That's the scam. This 72-hour clearance window is the only time the math actually works in the consumer's favor. It's the one time a year the retailers are actually bleeding margin. But you have to be incredibly careful right now because retailers know people are hunting for these specific drops. They are deliberately burying the exact SKUs I just talked about under slightly older, cheaper models with very similar names. A QM8 isn't always the exact QM8K variant. They want you to accidentally buy the old stock. I have put the exact vetted links in the description below to the specific models currently hitting these historic price crashes. Those are the safe versions. If you are pulling the trigger this week, use those to make sure you don't get trapped in a revision switch out. Let me know in the comments which one you're actually going after, or if you think I'm completely wrong about that LG UI. I'll be down there arguing with you guys for the next 2 days. Stay skeptical, protect your wallet, and I'll see you in the next one.